And I'd now like to invite to the floor some representatives from industry who are now going to answer some questions more from the employment perspective. So we have Maria Boyle from Psychology Service Registration Advisor with New South Wales Department of Education. We have Philippa Thornton, Executive Director, Resource Therapy Institute. Michelle Button, who's the Manager, Educational Psychology with Learning Links. Ruth Marshall, Principal Psychologist, Youth Justice, New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice. And Maureen Kenyon James, Learning Support Coordinator, College of Professional Psychology. And you'll find further information about each of these presenters in your catalogue today. So if we've got somebody missing.
No, there's 5. Oh, we haven't got 5? We got someone missing? Okay.
One more.
We've got Maria, we've got Philippa, we've got...
Michelle? Yes.
Michelle's here. Ruth. Maureen, is Maureen here? Yep, so Ruth is missing. Okay.
Okay.
I'll see if I can find her.
We'll probably keep you all busy anyway. Okay. Just reminding you again that there's a different hashtag now for questions for this panel. These industry experts have graciously given their time today to participate in the panel, and they'll be focusing on the topic of employability. So we'd ask you to present some questions, if you will, for the panel, and perhaps if we can start with a general question, which is, what advice would you give to students with regard to career planning and career options? Advice perhaps that you wish that you'd have known when you started off in the field.
Thanks. What advice I would give to myself is actually learn more life and business skills. Because once you've finished your academic career, you're going to be out there in the world, meeting people, helping people. Psychology is a wonderful profession. And so I'd want to know more about how to run a business, which I'm running now, but that's something to get up to speed with really early on in your career. So developing relationships. So you need people like accountants, mentors in your life. Develop them now where you are so that when you move into the working world, you already have a set of networks. That would be my career advice.
And I'd probably suggest focusing on keeping things broad in the beginning, not locking yourself in, not overly investing in one path. There's a lot of ways to get to where you want to go, and sometimes you don't even know where you want to go when you start the journey, but keeping your options open and just see what comes along, but actively talking to people in the industry, doing exactly what you've done today, come and listening to people, getting advice from people if you have a placement or you have a supervisor in one of your placements, to really talk to them about their path, how they find, and begin to make those networks early. You'll be already networking with your colleagues and your peers that you're studying with, and all of those relationships are really important.
Thank you. I probably have a couple of points. One is on that path, not getting locked into a particular job. For example, if you're in a job and you've taken it because there's not many options as a psychologist, maybe initially when you're first is actually going, okay, do I really like what I'm doing? And make that choice fairly early on, because as a recruiter of many, many psychologists at Learning Links, I often have to turn people away because they just haven't had the experience I need, and they're 10, 15 years down the track and they're wanting to change career paths. So that's one piece of advice. And also attending days like this, because I must say there was nothing like this when I started. I didn't know kind of where I was going after that, so it was good to attend things like this. So that's my 2 pieces of advice.
My advice would be, as psychologists, we're supposed to be experts in human behaviour. I think it's very important to have your life together. I think it's very important to know who you are, and you have a very good idea then of being able to help other people know who they are, because often they're coming to you for those very reasons. What to do in life's transitions, what to do in times of trauma and grief, and we need to be there for them. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Hello, yes, I'm Ruth. Went to the toilet after the last session. Yeah, it's good advice. I'm not sure that I have my life together. The bio for me is about nearly 10 years out of date. So I have now worked in forensic settings for nearly 40 years. I can talk to you about the forensic masters. I noticed that people were asking about that, so please ask me. There are still 2 in Australia. One is at UNSW, and I do some lecturing for them. And they take students every year. The closing date this year is the 31st of October. So please talk to me about that if you're interested. The advice that I would give is, I think doing a bit like you were saying, doing lots of voluntary work in an area, not only does that help others, but I think that it also lets you decide whether this is the sort of work that you want to do. It will also make a difference in terms of the CV. I mean, read a lot of resumes, a lot of CVs, and that will make you stand out if you've done a lot of relevant voluntary work. So, for example, I know this question was around what would you tell yourself that you didn't know, but I did know that, and I did that, and it's made a big difference. One of the things was working for the very first victim support scheme in the UK, and I think if you're working with people who have found it's very important to work with survivors. And I think, working with the homeless, working with young people or adults with literacy skills, working for Headspace, Lifeline, anything like that, I think is really important. Yeah, and have career goals and reflect on them regularly. So part of your learning plan, but also just making sure that you take time out to achieve some of those goals as well. Yeah.
That's terrific advice. Some of you have started to introduce your current role now, but I think it'd be interesting to hear what you're doing now and how you got there. So thinking back to when you were a first graduate and what you did and how that's led you to your current role now. That would be interesting.
So I've got the mic, so I guess I'll grace you with my story. I was actually a nurse to begin with, and that was when I was 17, so you change a lot. When I became an adult, I decided, now what will I like to do? One of the things in nursing that I really liked was being able to talk to people about what was going on in their lives, and I was very interested in their mental health because I realised that affected their physical health. So for me, right now, I am 58 and I'm a doctorate student, and that's in America, the university I'm at. It's a doctorate in counselling and psychological trauma. So I work with the organisation called Open Arms, which is used to be called the Veterans Families and Veterans and their Families and Counselling Service. So what I do with them is I work with many people who have been traumatised through either contemporary veterans being in combat, Afghanistan or Iraq, or older veterans, and then I'm looking at people with secondary PTSD, talking about children and grandchildren. So how did I get there? By the way, I also work at the College of Professional Psychology, and I'm on the learning support panel there. And what I do there is I help people as a supervisor, and also just to give advice about getting through your career. So so that's probably enough from me.
Hi, so I currently work at Learning Links. How I got there was I actually did the Western Sydney Education Developmental Masters back in the first cohort when it ran. So unfortunately there's not many of us around anymore as NNDev endorse psychologists in New South Wales. You can still do that course, I believe, in Queensland and in Melbourne. And then you can also do a distance ed as well at one of those areas. How I got there, essentially, my path was taken doing an undergraduate, actually Macquarie Uni, then I swapped over to Western Sydney in fourth year, and then I went and did the Masters straight after that. I actually worked at Learning Links as an intern in one of my first placements. So it was interesting how that all turned around, and in the meantime went and worked with mental health across the lifespan, adolescents and as well as children and adults and older adults as well, supporting particularly rural areas, etc. like that. I'm now the psychology manager at Learning Links. And we have seen Learning Links grow from basically an assessment clinic through to assessments, intervention. Since 2009, we've run a 4+2, 5+1 internship program for provisional psychologists providing supervision, etc. So we've seen psychology grow in amazing ways, not necessarily attract the Ed and Deb and Dor psychologists, but we will take anyone with experience working in schools, etc. So if you're interested in that kind of a career path, we definitely have an education developmental focus at Learning Links.
Thank you. So I work for the Department of Education, and I'm currently working in state office as a registration advisor, and I work with workforce development as well. So I've been working for the Department of Education for about 20 years as a school counsellor and as a senior psychologist education, and part of that role was supervising school psychologists and school counsellors and their direct service to primary schools and high schools in a couple of different areas in Sydney, around Hurstville and also around the Mascot area. So how I got there was I originally started a social work degree at Sydney University, but in the early 80s it was quite Marxist and feminist and a bit radical, and didn't really feel like it was what I wanted at that point in time. So I changed to primary teaching, and I worked as a teacher in schools here in Western Sydney actually, and then in Japan and London for a couple of years, and I actually really loved it. But it was while I was travelling that I really kind of reflected on, and I had, I guess, the space, which is something that was mentioned here, to think about what I wanted to do, and I realised I really liked people's stories. I really liked helping people, and I really enjoyed working with students when I was teaching who had a lot of difficulties, either emotionally or behaviourally or academically. So when I came back, I went back to Macquarie Uni and completed my psychology degree, and then went to work for the Department of Education. In 2016, we started taking in people who were as school psychologists, so people that didn't have a teaching background, into the school counselling service. So now we have two pathways into the school counselling service: people who are employed under a teacher award who have been teachers as school counsellors, and people who have a psychology background and school psychology, and then the school psychologists that are employed under a public service award. We have some scholarships for people, and we also have a partnership with Wollongong University. So I know there was a question that came up a little bit earlier. So we have a stand outside in the expo, so come and talk to us. We have Murray Claude, who's here from Wollongong University as well, to talk about that tailor-made program.
Thank you. I originally came over from New Zealand. I've got a degree in criminology, which was very nice, but it wasn't very useful. And I did my graduate diploma and honours through UWS while I was working full-time, which is a hard gig. And when I first arrived from New Zealand, I actually got work as a counsellor in drug and alcohol back in 2000 in Cabramatta, so they were very fun times. I saw a lot of things. And there I moved into the health department, working at several areas. And I realised in my career that was a lot of people in trouble, but they're not alone. There was often families, relationships. We don't exist in a vacuum. And after working at the Langton Centre with the narrative therapy group, which was amazing, a wonderful area of the health department there, running group therapy programs, doing a lot of diverse things, even art groups, that sort of thing, I decided to take a $20,000 pay cut and go to Relationships Australia, which, you know, in my career I have done that at different times, making choice points. I've now well and truly overcome that sort of gap, and I worked for Relationships Australia, where I became an intern and did my couple and family graduate diploma. That was a real choice point for me because I went to one lecture in my clinical psychology masters and dropped out. So, yeah. And I've thought about going back and doing it, but I'm too busy. I'm too busy in my private practice. So I've got Marriage Works, which my husband and I run, and Resource Therapy Institute Australia, where we teach other psychologists and other training, because it's a model that is very trauma-informed. If you're working out there with couples especially, and I also work for victim services as a contractor, you need to have a sort of a trauma-informed background. And as I said earlier, you also, if you're thinking about going into private practice, which is an amazing, and I think quite a tough gig right now, it's really hard to break through. Join a group practice to start, would be my advice. Get some people around. It's very different. I remember working at the health department and then moving to Relationships Australia. It trained me on what it was to work in an office type environment where we were taking fees. At the health department, I hadn't taken any fees like that, so you need to be comfortable with that. And having a process for how you run not only your sessions, but you need to be working on your business and in your business, finding that time. And really networking is a really useful thing. Coming out here today has been it's a real honour and a privilege. So that's how I kind of came to be here today. So thank you.
Thanks. Some more thoughts there?
Okay, as I said earlier, so I started, and it's nearly 40 years, I've been working in forensic settings. I started in 1980 in a forensic hospital. We then referred to people as the criminally insane. I think we've actually moved on quite a bit since then. So now we call them forensic patients. So I did a degree in psychology and then went on to do law and criminology and then forensic psychology and then actually psychiatry through PhD in psychiatry. But it doesn't make me a psychiatrist. So just pointing that out. You do have to do the medical degree first. I started off working in a hospital and with the National Association of Care and Resettlement of Offenders. And then I started working for the Home Office Prison Department, and I was there in a big male maximum security prison for about 15 years, in the days where only men worked in male prisons and only women worked in women's prisons. So it was an interesting introduction, being the only woman in a huge maximum security male prison. I also worked 1 day a week with women and 1 day a week with young people. So then I worked for came over here, worked for Corrective Services, helped them to establish the sex offender programs, and then sort of just was in the right place at the right time. I say that, though, but I was approached to take on the role of chief psychologist with juvenile justice, as we then were. It's now Youth Justice New South Wales. It's not just a case of being in the right place at the right time. I think I knew a lot of people. The networking is extremely important. Getting yourself out there, going to conferences, and if they are too expensive, getting onto the conference organising committees, making sure that, and there's a lot of free stuff out there as well. So getting onto mailing lists as well, not just for, sorry, this is a bit more advice, which you didn't ask for. But so getting onto mailing lists. So not just for psychology, also for law. For example, a law school at the University of Sydney gives some great free CPD sessions, and also overseas, like universities at US and the NERI Institute, I think it's called. Now, and I've been with Youth Justice for about 10 years, I think, now. So, really interesting work. I'm responsible for the clinical supervision of all the psychologists in the state, and also their professional development, organising conferences, but also providing evidence-based advice to the executive, to the minister, and so it's a lot to do, a lot of policy stuff and briefing notes, and that sounds really boring, but it's a really exciting place to work. So that's how I got to where I am today.
Terrific. There's some really interesting stories there, different pathways to different types of professional outcomes. We have quite a few students interested in how to gain experience whilst they're still an undergraduate, and in your roles as employers, what you look for in new grads in terms of experience, and what advice you might have to students about where they might find the kind of experience that you'd be interested in seeing.
Okay. For me, in my pathway, the interesting thing was that I learnt a lot about psychology by becoming an intern at the College of Professional Psychology. I learnt from the supervisors there. I learnt more psychology than I'd learnt in my 2 degrees that I'd done. I learnt how to be professional, how to speak to people, how to care for people, how to be compassionate. I learnt probably a lot of things. At the time, I was working in drug and alcohol at Royal North Shore Hospital, and that was very challenging. So it was great to be able to have mentors at the college who had worked there themselves. They'd had a lot of experience. Any question I had, they could answer. I then went on to another area of practice, which is still addictions, gambling, and set up a clinic at Hornsby Hospital. Now, I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't feel competent, if I didn't feel I had the support behind me, and the college really gave me that, and it just made me feel that I had the integrity and the professionalism to do that. So it's part of my what I'm looking for graduates is someone who has a good attitude, who's willing to learn, who's willing to actually listen to other people who have got more experience than you have. That's very important.
So I guess I'm going to talk about it from 2 different perspectives. So we do take on many provisional psychologists, or soon-to-be provisional psychologists, so finish their 4th year. What we're looking at Learning Links is, look, you don't necessarily have to have a huge amount of practical experience. We do take people on who have had minimal experience, and we will train you up in that area to become experienced in the definitely education, development and psychology, but also in other areas as well. Look, we do ask the question in our interview, what experience have you had with children? And sometimes people can't answer that question. And we say, well, do you have any nephews? Do you have any children yourself? What experience do you have? And rapport building you will have. Because, I mean, that basic element, we are looking for people who, in the interview, present as if they will be able to communicate well with others. We also do a written task as well to see your written skills, because we do a lot of report writing, so we just need to make sure that your literacy levels are at a certain standard for report writing. If we're recruiting for registered psychologists, we are looking, I guess, more for people who do have a little bit of experience at least working with children and adolescents. Although in saying that, I've just interviewed and taken on someone who started a couple of weeks ago who's been an org site for the last 15 years, has wanted to change pathways, and she has done her research. Like, she aced that interview. She doesn't have the experience on resume. We doubted whether we'd take her on, but we have taken her on because she did her research, she knew what she was doing, and we are providing that level of support for her to be able to transition into a new career path for her. So it's a little bit of a, it depends on the situation and how keen you are to work in that area. We will train people, because we know there's a lot of people that are not trained specifically. A lot of people work in OC rehab because it's a job that you can easily get access to. We will support you through that supervision, but we will also give you access to the assessment tools across the broad range beyond OC rehab as well. Okay.
So the Department of Education has a couple of different pathway options. We take school psychologists who are already graduates and have general registration, and there we're looking for people who possibly have child and adolescent experience, but if they don't, and we are looking at skills in communication, being able to work as a team member, and also having sort of some general sort of evidence-based best practice commitment, and that they may have some experience in some community or outside the workplace skills where they've gathered things like working with wellbeing and voluntary work. So that would be if they were already registered, but we do take people who into our scholarship programs, and here we're looking for the academics, so that they at least have a credit average to get into one of our university programs, but that they also have those, again, the communication, the relationship, some of those soft skills with a capacity to, we're looking really for potential to be able to work in schools and a commitment to working with young people.
I started voluntary work with Youthline. That helped me sort of branch out. But I was thinking, as part of my advice I would give, is actually find work outside in customer service. If you can work with people and deal with people's problems when they're really in the midst of that, that's going to be such a transferable skill for you. And you can put that on your resume. I'd also, one of the things I did early on in my career was I got my certificate for, I can't even remember what it's called now, workplace training and assessment. Boy, that was a scaffold into lots of things, and I got a job actually as a trainer during my workplace, and that gave me some further skills, because the more skill sets you can draw upon, it's a lot richer for an employee. Personally, if I'm looking for a psychologist, they've got to be quite well organised. I'm not really looking at their grades, I'm looking more at their personal skills. So that's where I think customer services, if you can run a group initiative. One of the other things I did early on was run a self-esteem workshop for women. And I'd be thinking about areas where there are gaps and needs out there in society. The first thing as I'm sitting up here is aged care. I would go and do some voluntary work there in some capacity if I could, saying I'm a student, or some of those other tougher areas to break into where it's perhaps not so sexy, but it's very rewarding. So that's what I would sort of suggest in doing that. So diversify your training. Think about where your current workplaces are, what customer services skills you've got. One of the hardest jobs I had was actually working at Fuji Xerox when I first came over from New Zealand, because I couldn't find work. Boy, if you can talk to someone over the phone and try and fix their Xerox machine, it's a very helpful thing, and a lot of pressure too. Yeah, so think about those environments where, like, you might be a mother, you might be a sister, you've got those family environments that you can also use to further your career path. Thank you.
I think there was some good advice there around not only thinking about the qualities and attitudes that you bring, but also where you can find experience. It's not always in a paid job. It might be in volunteer work. It might be drawing on your life experience, or it could be drawing on work that might not automatically be seen as psychological, but has skills that you can transfer into that context, communication, relationship skills. So really good advice there. There's a student here who's quite interested in the forensic setting and would like to know, what does that kind of work consist of? Is it purely working within the criminal justice system?
Yeah, it's interesting. When I became a forensic psychologist a long time ago, and I would tell people, like, oh, you work with dead people? Like, what? So there's a lot more understanding, I think, and a lot more people interested in this area. So forensic really just means pertaining to the law. So you can work with criminal justice. Most forensic psychologists, I think, in Australia work for either corrective services, youth justice, the police, or work in private practice. But there are other fields in which you can work. So there's three main areas. So there's the sort of forensic clinical work, so with people, either assessments for pre-sentence reports for whether or not someone is fit to stand trial, to parole reports, to treatment reports looking at treatment needs, assessment of cognitive ability, for example. Then you'd also be involved in providing treatment, so that would be the one-to-one or group work. For example, we run DBT skills groups for young women. So you'd be looking at assessment and treatment. Then you'd also be doing some forensically relevant research. We have a lot of different research projects that we're involved in, and the other is the consultancy, as I mentioned before, sort of evidence-based advice to people with regard to, say, policy or decision making. So yeah, you could work in a number of different areas, but that's what you would be asked to do mainly. Does that answer the question, really?
Do you need a forensic master's to work in the area of forensics?
No, you don't. No, and I think that came up in the last session. We have EdDev endorsed psychologists. We have clinical psychologists. We have forensic psychologists. We also have provisional psychologists and those who are on the registrar program to become endorsed in an area of practice endorsement. So you don't have to be a forensic psychologist, no. And as we heard earlier, there are fewer master's courses. We hope that will change, but yeah, there are fewer master's courses than there used to be about 10 years ago. I think there was 14. And it's interesting, actually, because the APS white paper is looking at expanding the number of people who will get a Medicare rebate and the number of sessions from 10 to up to 40 for particular diagnoses. So it's interesting. Things are changing, and they're also going to be looking at the areas of practice endorsement shortly. So things are always changing. But no, you don't have to be endorsed in forensic psychology to work in a forensic setting.
There's a question about, from an employer's perspective, how do you go about finding your candidates? Do you have a favourite website, for example, that you advertise on? What are some of your methods for finding new candidates for positions?
Okay, so I'll just keep the microphone as I've got it. But we've currently advertising for a range of rural, regional roles, and we've just done some metro recruitment as well. So the first place would be I Work for New South Wales, which is the government website, but also Psych Exchange, Seek, all the sort of other areas, and also some of the Aboriginal websites as well, because we want to increase the number of psychologists we have working for us who are Aboriginal. So I think, given the overrepresentation of young people who are Aboriginal in custody, we advertise in all those areas. And one of the things that I've been doing this year is going to a range of different universities to talk about the recruitment as well. So, yeah.
Do some others have some thoughts on that?
As I said, networking is really important. I'm a network coordinator of the Randwick Mental Health Professionals Network. You can join those, and you're going to meet other psychologists and other people. You can even go and present at those if you want. If anyone wants to come present, you're welcome if you want over in Randwick. So just meeting other health professionals and training workshops as well. People can, I met someone and you see people and you connect with people. It's a good way. That's where I will look for someone as I'm seeing them in action and what their interactions are like.
They're very similar. Psych Exchange, Seek, Jora, on our website itself. We'll sometimes put it on Facebook as well. So depends. Yeah.
And the Department of Education have a website at I Teach New South Wales, but if you just put that into your search engine, you can find all the information about the school psychologist programs and the school counselling programs and links to the universities.
I just have one more. I was thinking if there's a particular organisation that you'd like to work for, I would target them and really send my CV and try and make myself part of their network and get links in that way. So, for instance.
the College of Professional Psychology, we don't actually get a job for you, but we help you with the placements, and we use all those platforms. And we actually teach you how to do your CV, get that up and running. We look at you overall and how professional you are. We look at things like previous experience that you can put down that can actually go towards being useful in different jobs, and we give you a lot of advice as to different areas that you can work in. So there's a lot of help there from the college. Mm-hmm.
Just reminding me of something. So with the forensic masters, there are 4 placements that you do, and we often have people coming along. So on the 23rd and 24th of October, they have their annual. It's a clinical and forensic psychology research conference, and at that point, and you're all welcome to come along to that. I checked with Richard Kemp, and he said that was fine, just to find out more about what forensic psychologists do, so if you are interested. But just in terms of their program, we do to have placements, and a range of placements are organised, but a number of our current staff are people who have been with us on a placement, because I think what you're saying as well is that we see those students actually in the workplace, and they hit the ground running usually because they come to us as their 3rd or 4th placement after they've been at their own internal forensic clinic, the Wentworth Clinic. So I think that is important. So we encourage so it is masters students who do the placements, not just UNSW, but here, and also Macquarie, UNE, Charles Sturt, yeah. All those.
Terrific. There's a question here from a couple of students who say, if you aren't the best student academically, will you still be noticed when it comes to recruitment?
Sorry, the question was, if you're not the best
if you're not strong academically, can you still be competitive in recruitment?
Absolutely. That's a definitive answer. Look, I find that what's more important than, the academic requirements is that you have an attitude towards people. You're willing to actually work. You're willing to put a good effort in, to show up, to actually spend time researching what you need to do to be the best in your field. Now, psychology is like anywhere else. It's not the people that have the doctorates and things like that. It's the people that actually care about other people. And that's the best thing I could say to you. If you've got a passion for something and it's helping other people, then psychology is for you. So it doesn't matter whether you've got a master's or you're endorsed or you've got this or that. So that, absolutely is my answer.
I would agree. Absolutely, I'd agree. We don't necessarily even look sometimes at your academic records when we recruit. We want to see what your experience is, how you relate to other people. We might have a glance, but it's not the be-all and end-all for recruitment.
We're looking for people who can work with children and adolescents, and that's not for everybody. But if you're able to establish relationships and engage young people and children and work with parents, then definitely those skills are what we are looking for. Of course, you need to pass the course. So you're going to need some level of academic ability, and the job is not an easy job. If you're going to be a psychologist and you're going to keep up with your, continual learning and be able to work in that field, you do need a certain level of academic ability. But certainly that's not the most important thing when you're sitting opposite a client or a student or a young person.
Yes, academic intelligence is an important quotient for getting your degree. That's going to open pathways for you, but there's also many other intelligences: our emotional intelligence, our social intelligence, our psychological intelligence, our financial intelligence. The more you develop these particular areas, the more employable and useful you are going to be, both to yourself and to others in the workplace, and that'll shine through.
There's a question asking, and you can... Oh, sorry. Sorry. If you're, from your employer perspective, do you sometimes consider applicants for roles in your organisations which don't have registration, like third-year graduates rather than graduates who've gone on to do their fourth year or registration? Are there any roles in your organisations, or if not, what would be some advice you'd have for those students?
Yeah, at Learning Links currently, the only roles we would have that would not, if you're not at least completed your fourth year, we take on, we have a literacy and numeracy program where you could get some volunteer experience. It's not a paid role, but it's a volunteer experience working with children in lots of schools, many schools across New South Wales and Victoria, and they support self-esteem and self-concept in children in lots of schools. So unfortunately not at the moment, so watch this space maybe.
I'm just thinking about in schools, I maybe should have mentioned it, there's a role in a school called a school learning support officer, which kind of was the old teacher's aide referred to. So that's a paid position within schools that, you can often approach schools with your CV and see if they do have any school learning support officer roles, and that can often give you experience working with young people with often different disabilities or in different sort of learning needs, and that can also be a good entry point.
I would consider volunteers, if I'm training, they can come along and watch the training, so they get that for free, and you're learning experience and connecting with other people. And also third year people, if they're willing to do sort of the grunt work, I think it's really good if you can do that, like admin and social media stuff, find gaps. Psychologists would be very interested in that.
And if you wanted to work with youth justice, we have youth officer roles and caseworker roles. Obviously, we couldn't put anyone in a psychology role because of the protected title. Under national law, you'd have to be at least provisionally registered. But there are other roles in which, and we have a number of our youth officers and caseworkers are registered psychologists. So that all the skills that you would be learning would be really transferable to those roles.
Terrific. Another question for education and developmental. Can you please let us know more about the practical experiences in working in that field? Education and developmental psychology? Yeah.
So what you're actually doing, I'm assuming, in that work. So we do many assessments, so diagnosing learning difficulties, learning disabilities, so dyslexia, dyscalculia, intellectual disabilities, ADHD, autism, different levels, etc. So assessment skills are really key. But also working with the families as well. It could be around even depression, anxiety, and so forth like that, and you're getting reports from teachers, from families, from the student themselves. We also work with intervention. I guess the most common presentation we see is anxiety, which is probably fairly consistent. Anxiety, separation and divorce in the family, bullying, social skill difficulties. We have a wait list huge for social skill difficulties. So, I mean, that's the area. But look, education developmental also, doesn't necessarily mean you are working with children and adolescents. It does for me, that's where the path led me, but it is across the lifespan as well. So if you are interested in that field, it is all different how people develop in different ages. It's just that in my pathway, that's where it's taken me. So I don't know whether you wanted to comment at all, or
just something that wasn't mentioned, which probably I should mention, is within the education department, if you're taken on, we do take on provisional psychologists and support them through the registration process. So we have quite a number of our school counselling staff who are board-approved supervisors, and we're continually in training more and more. So if that's something down the track that you'd like to be a supervisor, we certainly take on people, and a lot of our people have previously been teachers and are very committed to supervision, and we do have really robust processes and make sure that we give you everything you need to meet all the competencies across the lifespan with access to all the assessment tools that you would need to become generally registered.
An interesting question. How would, if a student has a disability or even perhaps has a mental health issues themselves, how might that impact their future employability, registration, future employability in the field?
It's probably going to help them because you're going to have an experience of what it's like to be in your client's chair, and that is a really useful experience. So you're going to have some experience what it's like being working with a health professional, hopefully, and hopefully getting some help if that's a mental health issue. It gives people more compassion in my experience. I have a lot of clients and supervise a lot of people that have foot in both camps. So it broadens your horizons in a sense. In terms of disability, it's going to give you, whatever your disability, other ability is, some more knowledge and experience of what helps, what doesn't help for people.
I think for the New South Wales Department of Education, we are a government agency, so we come under the umbrella of making all those adjustments for disability and employment. So you can read all about those on the website.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. We recruit, but in saying that with mental health issues, it depends how, if you're quite unwell, then obviously it's against our, we're mandatory reporters if we feel another psychologist is unwell. So just be mindful of that. Are you well enough to be working with other people at that moment? But otherwise, yeah, absolutely. It's totally fine.
Thanks. So at Northern Beaches Hospital, where I run some groups, we have peer support workers, and they're people with lived experience of mental health, and they go in to the acute areas and they go and talk to the clients there, or patients, because they're in the hospital, and they're quite valuable. A lot of their insights in terms of the treatment they've received, what they've learnt, about the interventions that have been done on them themselves. So it's an area that I don't think it. I'm with you. Like if you're quite unwell, obviously you don't. You need to be well enough to work with people, but it's not a barrier. I guess that's what I'm saying. Mm.
Yeah, that leads into another question similar, which is about how important is self-care for psychologists, and how do you fit this into your busy lives?
Okay, self-care. Well, self-care for psychologists. Obviously, if you're in a field like me, listening to tragic stories every day, and relationship difficulties, and people struggling with trauma experiences, and I think it's very important to always stand back from what you're doing and saying, why is it that I'm here? Now, if you don't practice what you preach, you shouldn't be doing it. So it's very important to actually look after yourself. Physically, it's important to look after yourself, mentally, obviously, and also socially, just to have some time out where you're not actually working. Each day, it's important to think about that if you're not well enough yourself, you haven't got enough sleep, then you can't really actually look after your clients. So it's mandatory in my books.
No, I would agree with that. It's really important. It's really important to have clinical supervision, to use reflective practice to ensure that you take time out. I do run a lot of workshops, and we always have an element. So working with adolescents who sexually abused, for example, trauma-informed care, all of those sort of fields are, and we work in youth justice, we're working with very vulnerable populations, often where they've fallen through the cracks elsewhere. So the trauma, the complex trauma involved is massive. So we definitely need to include self-care in every sort of training we run, and also I make sure that when I've written manuals for psychologists, I put it front and center, because I really think it's important to look after yourselves, but also look after your colleagues. Yeah.
Yeah, and like everything, you need a plan. So when you're working, you need to plan your work week. You need to plan how you're going to look after yourself, and that's very important.
Yeah, mean, many workplaces put in wellbeing plans as part of even your, when you're working with your manager and so forth like that. So you actually, as part of like, just say you've got KPIs, key performance indicators, you might also, as part of that, have, and we kind of encourage that with our KPIs, is that you have a wellbeing KPI as well to make sure you're, you know, looking after yourself essentially.
I really like the airline analogy where you put your mask on first before you look after others. You really need to be looking after yourself if you're going to do the job and if you're going to have any longevity in the profession. So again, yeah, with the education department, supervision is key. We work in teams and we practice reflectively, and we look at how we care for ourselves, but also our colleagues as well.
I think working in the field, if you work there long enough, you'll eventually experience some form of burnout. It just happens. It probably won't be till you look back and your supervisor's going, "Do you think you'll burn out a little bit?" And that's where fun comes in. I think we spend a lot of time in our heads with our hearts open, so it's good to do other things. I do Argentine tango. I like escaping at Netflix. You know, really outside the box stuff. Get back into nature. Find what kind of fills you up and inspires you again, so you can bring that re-energy back into your work and who you are. And of course, great supervision for your different areas. I have about 3 different supervisors because of their different expertise and that I can call upon. Also your friends, your family relationships. Keep your connections open. It's so busy, you know, you can work so much. And make some boundaries with yourself about your work hours, how many people you're seeing. I don't see clients on the weekends, for instance, but I'm about to go into 4 days worth of training, and I'm set aside, so I'll be going to the movies, I'll be doing other things outside of that to just keep me going as well, and also take some downtime afterwards. Holidays, some time off is very important to recharge the battery.
I'm just aware we started a little bit late, so we might just go for another 5 minutes or so. I know there's a lot of questions you've put up on the board and we won't get through all of them, so we'll just have a couple more questions to finish off, I think. One question is, what would you say, and I know you've spoken to this a little bit already, but what would you say in terms of encouraging students to go cold calling with organisations if they're seeking volunteer or experience or work?
Okay, so just turning up is good, but the problem is sometimes in organisations there may or may not be anybody that you could talk to that's appropriate, but maybe just a little bit of pre-planning first. But I'm all for that. I think it's a very good idea to present yourself in the best light you could possibly do. And yes, I think it shows initiative. Yeah, I think it's a good idea. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wouldn't suggest you just turn up at a detention centre or prison, actually. But I do think there's a balance. Like, you don't want to become annoying, but you do want people to know that you're interested and you're keen and you're passionate about the area. So I have people contact me regularly. I like to mentor people coming new to the profession. So even if there's not a role, I'll keep in touch with someone. And so there is a balance, yeah. But I definitely think, yeah, talk to people today, get their email addresses or phone numbers and contact them, yeah.
And also the Mental Health Professionals Network and the APS, join those organisations, be seen, be there, and get to know people. And networking is a really good way of landing a job.
Yeah, from a, I guess, perspective of an employer, I find that, like, we have multiple locations across Sydney, so, and it's myself and Olivia, who was actually here earlier, who you need to get in contact with. So if you just turn up at a location and we're not there, it's a bit of a problem. They'll probably just give you the email address anyway. So I agree, find out the email address, send it to our recruitment website, you know, and I would broadly say that's similar to larger organisations anyway.
Yeah, the Department of Education, there are a couple of key contact people on the website to contact them and get on just through the processes. It's a big organisation, but certainly you can make local connections with people. Every school has a school counsellor or a school psychologist. So, if you were to contact, some local people, most of them I think would be quite happy to speak to you.
I came here today actually through LinkedIn, so there's a great big network there. I joined all the social media stuff and also Facebook groups where you're interested. If there's an area of psychology, there's quite a lot of those connections. I would also think about if there's a particular program or problem that you can solve within an organisation. So first of all, I'd do some research on that organisation, and perhaps you're seeing little moments of that you could offer something, whether it's a meditation program, a music therapy program, a drama program, I don't know, whatever your skill set is, and have something ready to run and offer. So solving a problem and coming up with a solution. If you're going to find out who to talk to first, have someone's name and develop a relationship there. If not that time, it's going to be in the future. Keep them in mind, and every 6 months or so connect with them or something. Yeah.
It sounds like networking is a really good piece of advice. And has networking been very important in your own career development?
Yes, it has. I was a student member of the APS, and that's how I first learned about the College of Professional Psychology. I saw an ad there and I thought, oh, what's this? Nobody told me about this. Why didn't I know about this? And that was great. And then, of course, I asked people and then went and had an interview there and ended up doing the internship program. Throughout my career, networking's been very important. It's just one of the things about networking, though, I think is important is having a good reputation yourself and having integrity. I think that's really important, and the networking actually gets done for you.
I mean, I agree, as well as, it's also a maintenance of that networking as well. It's not just a matter of just connecting once off. It's actually about reconnecting and continuing to connect, don't bother people, but just, continuing in maintenance. It's actually it's like a relationship manager. You're managing the relationships you have professionally, essentially.
I'm thinking about, along those lines, if you were to join the Department of Education, then, networking within that department, there's a lot of different opportunities for professional learning, but also participating in different interest groups and working on different projects within the department. So joining those things gives you a profile, helps you network with the different people, and then again your reputation will do the work for you amongst those groups.
Hugely. I think the first place you can network is often in training events with other psychologists, because meeting and developing a relationship, they're going to be your best referrers, and vice versa, because you need a referral network as well of people you might not be able to see for various reasons. When I first started working too in Cabramatta and Relationships Australia, I also belonged to interagency meetings, domestic violence liaison interagencies and different. That's a really good place because you're showing up and showcasing who you are, what your organisation is. And we've mentioned again the Mental Health Professionals Network. That's free, and you're getting professional development there. So yeah, networking is a fabulous thing.
Just put another plug in for the college. Being part of the college in over 20 years that I've been involved, it's like a family. Everybody that works within psychology, if you're a COP graduate, you tend to actually have, I'm not saying favouritism, but you tend to actually think, I know that they've got good training, I know that they're professional. And so that's been a good thing for me, and I'm now a supervisor there as well, so I help a lot of the students along the way with that. So that's very important.
Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. You've got some great questions here, and I know I didn't get to all of them. I would encourage you as students to stay for the networking part of today's event, which is out in the foyer. And the representatives from our panels today will be around for you to have a chat with if you want to have those questions answered. But before we go, I would just like to say a really big thank you to our employers here today and offer you just this little gift, a little token of our appreciation for you coming and volunteering your time to be here and to assist the students in their career planning. So thank you so much for that. And then I'll hand back to Karen.